Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain, and I want to welcome you to this presentation on how to build and execute an effective supplier risk management strategy presented by Kraft. One quick note, there will be an audience question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Audience members are encouraged to submit their questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Now, managing a global supply chain has never been more challenging, with complex, ever-evolving regulations, increasingly frequent weather events, volatile geopolitical crises, and sophisticated cybercrime. To get from constant crisis mode to proactive risk mitigation, you need a comprehensive view of your entire supplier network, along with reliable intelligence. So today, we're going to share three crucial components of a successful supplier risk management, or SRM, strategy, and talk about how Kraft's supplier risk management solution can help you understand risk across your entire supplier network, use intelligent AI-driven signals to build resilience against disruptions, and create smoother collaboration across departments. With that, I want to introduce our speakers for today. Mimi Spear is Chief Marketing Officer of Kraft. Mimi is an expert in enterprise SaaS, or software as a service expertise, scaling global marketing initiatives, and launching new industries. She's held executive roles at VMware, SAP, Oracle, Turntide, and Molecular. Ashley Arufo is Senior Director of Product with Kraft. Ashley leads the teams responsible for addressing business-critical events and unforeseen dependencies across supply chains. Prior to joining Kraft, she served as the product lead for an 0-1 stage machine learning mortgage processing startup acquired by Black Knight Financial Services. And Daniel Kreese is Director of Third-Party Risk Management with 3VRM. Daniel is a specialist in strategy, transformation, and operation of third-party risk management and operational resilience. Dan has led TPRM globally for HSBC and Deutsche Bank, and has held related procurement and supplier management roles at Barclays. So with that, I want to start by bringing in Mimi Spear. Mimi, before we get started with this fantastic panel we have lined up for today, and hello, Mimi. Tell us
Hello, how are
about,
you?
we're doing great, thank you. Mimi, tell us about what are the big challenges in this area of SRM right now, and also tell us a little bit about Kraft.
Thank you, Bob. It's been great to be here, and I wanted to just kick off this whole webinar to give a little bit of perspective of what is going on in this industry around supplier risk management. And so, essentially, organizations right now realize, and 60% of enterprises expect instability to have a detrimental impact. And this is due to supplier risk. So supplier risk has become a critical need in the supply chain stack, and it's become a huge topic even at the board level because of the massive amount of geopolitical issues that keep happening, the increasing regulatory requirements that are going on, especially in regulated industries, even unforeseen weather acts, the amount of cybersecurity that happens, commodity volatility. So there is so much and so many different types of disruption and risk that happen within the supply chain that organizations realize that this is something that needs to be solved. And unfortunately, today teams are not set up for disruption to solve the problem of disruption. There it goes. They're not prepared. And why are they not prepared? Because most organizations really haven't set up an SRM program in the first place, and typically only have a very limited amount of data that they have access to. So oftentimes, public company financial data to start with. But unfortunately, the different organizations within the company, whether it's the ESG organization or the cyber IT security ops organization or the supply chain organizations, the expectation is to have much more visibility around the suppliers and the risks that they could bring to this business. So even wrong suppliers are chosen in the first place because the proper due diligence isn't happening. Real-time risks aren't understood ongoing as suppliers are chosen and part of the integral part of the business. There's so much time wasted when there is a risk and figuring out what is the impact of those risks and what is the, across the organization, whether it be, time to market, whether it be, reputational, whether it be revenue risk, security risk, all of those issues have become a board level discussion. And the lack of coordination that's happening across organizations have made this topic be something that's worth a webinar. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So before we jump into the webinar and the panel discussion, I just thought it would be, interesting, and I want to make sure people know who Craft is and have a little bit more information about what we do. So our platform really focuses on three things. We empower teams to make better supplier decisions initially. We help them ongoing to minimize disruption, and we help them optimize their supply chain strategies as risk or as any type of potential risk is happening within the business. And so just a little bit more about our platform. We really are around three key use cases that we are focused on within the business. The first is supplier intelligence. So as you start your, resilience strategy and journey, you want to make sure you have a foundational comprehensive data fabric that allows you to understand all types of risks and around where your suppliers are today, and make sure the proper suppliers are chosen based on that risk. Secondly, and you want to be able to collaborate to make those decisions about your suppliers and if you have the right suppliers onboarded. Secondly, you want to be able to ongo your monitoring of those suppliers. We call this supplier risk management. We're going to talk a lot about that today. In order to have a supplier risk management program, you have to have the comprehensive foundation to start with of data. Then you have to be able to monitor ongoing the suppliers across all of those risk domains that we talked about when we talked about the problem. And then finally, you want to be able to take action, and you want to be able to do this across your organization in the way that makes sense for you. So, and you want to be able to focus on the risks that are most important to you. So we'll talk a little bit about how you start a supplier risk program and how you make sure that it's defined right for your business. And we'll get into that in a minute. And then finally, how does this impact your supply chain? Supply chain risk management really is when the supply chain is heavily involved and you, on a real-time and ongoing basis, can understand impact that suppliers are bringing to your business when they have a risk and how you might adjust your supply chain strategies accordingly. And so our solution really starts with, those comprehensive 3 steps and use cases, and allows you to evolve your strategy as you become more mature as a supply chain. So with that, and now that you know a little bit about the problem we're talking about, and you know a little bit about Craft, let's get into a discussion that really talks about the issues, and hopefully you guys can get involved and ask some questions as well.
Thank you so
Bob,
much,
I'll
Mimi.
hand it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you very, very much for laying all that out and us learning about some of these challenges at this point. I was just about to invite Ashley and Daniel, and here they are. Thank you. Hello to everybody. Thanks for joining us on this great panel. So indeed, we just have learned very briefly about what are some of the big challenges in supplier risk management. The question I have, and I want to pose it to you, Daniel, is how can businesses get started with building a more effective SRM strategy?
Yeah, so I think really this comes into 3, I guess, broad thematic areas that organizations need to think about when embarking on this. The first one is understanding what actually matters to you, what is important to you from a third-party risk point of view. And with that, it's about setting clear goals and a vision for the topic. But then very closely connected to this is getting senior management commitment and buy-in and support to what you're trying to do. Mimi mentioned just now, this is a board level topic in many organizations. And that's because we're increasingly using third parties for ever more critical aspects of what we do. And it's up there. If you're regulated, it's definitely up there as an important topic. I think once you've done that, you can take a look at, well, what's our risk appetite? What are we willing to suffer? What's the worst case scenarios that we can have? And start to understand limits and boundaries for yourself. And if you're not regulated, you do have to work that out yourself. Regulated sectors tend to be a little bit more conservative on this. With that, you can create a policy, some rules, a framework, help your organization understand how to do this and keep it all within some boundaries. And then the third point is really getting into the meat of doing it. So designing a risk assessment process, understand what's inherently risky, understand the risks associated with your third parties themselves, how to mitigate those, how to report them, what your reassessment process looks like and your assurance process looks like, and leverage technology to help you do that. So it sounds like quite a lot, but you can bucket it up into those three things. And by the way, they come in that order as well. If you haven't started this, that's the order to do it in, I think.
Well, thank you. That is pretty complex. Mimi, did you want to add to that?
Well, one of the things I think about often, and Ashley and I were just talking about this earlier today, is what if customers don't do anything? There are, I think we talk to a lot of customers today that are about to embark in an SRM program and strategy, and they're looking at their risk appetite and they're looking at their strategic suppliers, and they're determining, what do I want to invest? How do I balance the cost of disruption versus, investing in an SRM program and the risk of doing nothing? And so what I think, I always think about is the risk of doing nothing is so much more than the cost of an SRM program. And there's so many ways to get started in a more simple way and really focus in on your most, high risk levels or compliance areas that are most important to you and not have to invest in a lot, and they take it very simply and even start with your most strategic suppliers first, if you have 100 or 1,000 or whatever that might be, to make sure that the majority of your most strategic suppliers and the risk that you have the highest, concern around, that you have covered. So I don't know, Ashley, if you have any thoughts around this, but doing nothing just feels like you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, I think I spoke to one really senior supply chain center of excellence leader who said, when disruption happens, we all get in line. So it's so important for my team to be the first in line when the disruption happens. And if you do nothing, you usually don't get a chance to get in the first person in line.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for that. I do want to drill down a little later in this presentation to more about the price of inaction. But before we get to that, I'd like to know what are, that was a pretty complex graphic you put up there, Mimi, about all the different elements of the Craft SRM solution. But I'm wondering, what are some of the key ingredients in the actual technology? Could you talk about that? Maybe Ashley, you start off on that one. What are the pieces of technology that are really involved, and how do businesses get started from a technology standpoint?
Sure. So obviously the first thing that Mimi showed on that slide, and it's something that I think a lot about, is your data layer. So the data fabric. A lot of organizations have a few data partners where they get intel when they're doing due diligence on suppliers. And then really large global enterprises have, their own independent contracts across the enterprise. So the most important thing is figuring out what level of data and intel you actually want to share at a global level with all of your teams. And then on top of that, it's a fire hose of data. A lot of people, the access that we have nowadays, there's so much of it, right? So there's a little bit of who and how should they receive the data. What we call that is our risk engine, right? So it takes into consideration the impact of what's being said, who's saying it, what's the source, and how impactful it is to your business. And then last but not least, it's, okay, so now you have all of this intel and you're being flagged all the time with risks. Who are you going to share it with? Who's going to do it? Who's going to execute? So a big part of looking at these platforms is figuring out, is this the right tool that my teams can execute quickly, efficiently, and share just what needs to happen? So another power of three, I guess, is the data, the engine, and the collaboration tooling.
Mimi, can you help us navigate through all these
Yeah.
technology pieces?
Yeah, no, Ashley pretty much nailed it, but I'll just add one more that you can think of as a fourth, or you can kind of, weave it across all three. And that is, when you're thinking about your technology and shopping for the technology that's right for you, it's really important to consider configurability, because a lot of these solutions are a dump, as Ashley said, of fire hose information. And if you don't have the ability to choose the right data fabric, for example, or the right elements of data you need for which tiers of suppliers, and you don't have the configurability to, really determine the highest risk and what are the risk thresholds that you want to set in the solution because they're most important to you. And if you don't have the ability to at flexible kind of taking action in a more flexible way that allows you to set it up that aligns to your processes and doesn't kind of make you do it in their way, I think just having configurability across those three elements that she mentioned is going to be really important.
I want to hear more about configurability, because it's obviously a case of this is not one size fits all. It's not one solution that it's equally applicable to everybody, especially with the massive amounts of data and the increasing technology complexity that are overwhelming businesses today. the idea is, or the incentive then is to quote unquote filter out the noise so that you can, again, here's that word, configure information and features to be highly relevant to your particular thing. Daniel, talk more to me about what configurability around a unique supplier network actually would look like.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it all starts at the beginning of the process, at the beginning of the risk assessment process. And I'll probably use this word more than once today, but proportionality is king. As the guys have said, there literally is a fire hydrant of data and information. And the problem that I've seen throughout my career is very often we find ourselves drowning in information. And that's because historically, some of us haven't been proportional in the way that we've done this, which means that we're not identifying the highest risk, the most important organizations to us. And we're not putting more of or burning more of our calories in that space. So we're getting blinded by data. So number one is proportionality. If your risk process up front is proportional, it's designed to find the highest risk transactions, the highest risk third parties, then you can configure your tool to give you the information that you need. So for example, if you're using Craft as a tool, for instance, you wouldn't want to treat each of your third parties in an identical way because you'd get flooded with data. They've got a lot of data. So what you need to do is triage your third parties and then use Craft accordingly as an example. So that's where the configurability matters. The other bit, if you're a regulated organization, for example, regulations change, as does your risk appetite. So you do actually need the ability to be able to tweak things here and there. And that matters hugely, not just in your third party screening, but in your entire risk process. So yeah, that's where configurability fits into this.
I think another thing that I would add to configurability too is just the teams that are addressing or mitigating some of these risks have different thresholds or things that they can handle. So when looking at tools, it's really important to understand, do I have a team of 20 who can address some of these things? Do I have a team of 1? And is this team responsible for sustainability or cyber or both? So being flexible to the domains and the number of people really can make you successful or set you up to be unsuccessful.
Especially valuable today, given the resource, the reshoring, the nearshoring, the changes in sourcing strategies that many companies are experiencing now, as they look to, number one, reduce the amount of risk, and number two, just diversify their supplier base and respond to geopolitical trends and economic trends as well. All right, so this all sounds great, but I'm wondering, earlier we talked about this idea of going from reactive to proactive, an all-important transition that everybody needs to make in the area of SRM. Mimi, how can they do it? How can they make that shift as they embark on their SRM journey?
Yeah, so most people, as they think about reactive to proactive, they think of predictive, right? You think of what can you know ahead of time before it actually happens. And I think that an SRM program or really setting up a program in the first place allows you to almost, have that predictive capability, because what you're doing is, first of all, you're setting up the ability to get signals. So really what's happening in these technologies is they are giving you information as it becomes available. And it's not necessarily that a disruption has happened, but it's that there might be a risk within your supply chain because of the events that have happened in the world, whether it be weather or geopolitical, or it's something around, an identifying an acquisition, an M&A, something that's happened within, someone's gone bankrupt or, whatever. So it is a signal that a concern has happened. So that allows you, if you have an SRM program in the first place, they're starting there and you're being proactive because you are now getting these signals that tell you before risk has actually happened. The next is you really need to think about, and we talk to our customers all the time about this, getting an intelligence is great, or being able to predict things is great. But what about having your organization set up to take action? So what do you do if a supplier is out of compliance? If you found out that there is something that happened and they, have a forced labor, situation, or they are, doing business out of China and that is not a regulatory thing that cannot happen in your organization. What do you do? Those processes have to be set up ahead of time, and what you're going to do about it to mitigate that risk and maybe shift to a different supplier or go ahead and help that supplier get out of that country or whatever needs to happen. It might be something that's very quick and easy. It might be something that's very much defined the same every time, like a compliance requirement that is, something that you have to document and you have to show proof of within, your regulatory industry. And so you have that set up ahead of time. That is being proactive. Because of the amount of disruptions that could happen in supply chains now, thinking about proactivity in every step of the way of your supplier risk program is critical, whether it be the predictive, whether it be setting up yourself to take action, whether it be who you collaborate with within the organization to make sure that they are notified, because that might be information important to them. Cyber, IT ops, needs to be notified, et cetera. So many things I just talked about, but the idea is to be proactive every step of the way and to use your SRM program as the kind of path to do that.
I think one thing to add to Mimi as well is just a lot of organizations have data, but how they manage the trending data is super important too. So usually, big disruptions, not many of us can anticipate them happening at a global event, right? But for the disruptions that might be small cuts in your experience, there usually is trending behavior about suppliers or the commodities or what's going on in particular regions that are really going to impact you. So the better tools that you have that can help you read through trends can help you point out where suppliers' repeated negative behavior is something that you should be more proactive about.
Well, it seems like so many companies dealing with the supplier failures are finding out when it's too late, there's already damage done, and then you're scrambling, then you're reactive. Does this solution, or how can this solution be made to give you kind of a more early warning approach to, like, you start to see signs of a supplier failure before the failure happens, and therefore then you become truly proactive and you can head off the full impact of a supplier crisis? Is that indeed what we're talking about here? And if so, how? How does the machine work now?
Maybe I'll go first with Mimi.
Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
It's the leading indicators in the data, right? So often by the time it makes it to the headline, there's a big financial distress headline. And, our systems are categorizing that for you. But usually it's the behavior that happened in those trends I'm talking about in the supplier profiles themselves. They manifest in different ways. It could be the hiring trends. Or is there a lot of turnover? Are they not investing in people? Are they shifting innovation? Are they shutting down site locations? So there's all of these dots we talk about, and it's really important that you're able to connect those dots, right? And having a system that can connect them, because honestly, who could sit there and connect the dots all day for you? It's not really realistic. So figuring out which types of trends you've seen and which types of trends you want to follow are really optimal for, building out that entire strategy.
Daniel, you have a perception of that as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'd love to know Daniel's perspective. Yeah, no, I'm curious what Daniel's is too, because just to the amount of customers you're working with, it feels like a lot of customers start SRM because they've had a disruption and they've felt it already. And so, now they're going back and saying, we don't want this to happen again. But I'm curious what Daniel's perspective is.
I was just thinking, if there's any TPM or TPRM practitioners watching, I know what they're going to be saying, so I'm going to say this for them. So one of the biggest challenges that you have when you operate this, you're the head of third-party risk within an organization, is you find yourself wrapped up so much in the process. There are so many stakeholders internally. There's often regulation as well. There's audit, there's stakeholders, there's the risk owners in businesses. And your life and your job is in making the process work, getting transactions through so that business can happen. What that means is, the thing that we're talking about here, a TPM practitioner is going to be going, I'd love to get my hands on insights and data, because you know what? I'm guilty. I'm not getting to this stuff quick enough. So one of the things that we're doing, and have been for a little while with clients, is doing something called toppling silos, which is, there's a lot of silos within the process, lots of different stakeholders involved, all want their piece of information about a different type of risk. The reality is, if you do that, you lose sight of the risks that matter, so the proportionality becomes weaker. You make the journey for the risk owner really, really hard. And it's increasingly difficult then to actually get focused and have individuals in your organization looking at those insights that we've just talked about. So actually, at a practical level, if you're already doing a lot of this stuff, you've got to simplify your world and make a decision to focus on risk, focus on insights, use the data. Because I think what's fascinating nowadays, there is so much great information out there. And if you've configured your tools properly, you really can get it, but you've got to look at it, and you've got to make time to do that.
Interesting you talk about silos, because so many aspects of the organization have a hand in sourcing and procurement these days. Not just the CPO, not just the chief procurement officer, the CFO, the chief financial officer wants in, maybe the CEO, maybe other aspects, each in their own little silos, you just say. So is this solution we're talking about today, this SRM solution, able to incorporate all those parts of the department, work across all the silos so that everybody's on the same page?
I think
Well, I was just going to say,
sorry,
oh,
go on, Mimi. Go ahead. No, you go.
Well, I was just going to say that I think that's a big thing that has shifted over the last several years, probably since COVID, is, there wasn't, disruption didn't happen as often. And it was, the siloed organizations were sufficient to care about their things and just do it on their own. And I think what shifted is that because there's so many potential risks, and now there's so many stakeholders of the risk, and there's so many regulatory areas that span across organizations, and we're seeing this, all the time. We have a customer right now where they have an RFP for a supply chain organization needing supplier risk, and they have an RFP for the procurement organization needing supplier risk. And we're going in saying, wait a minute, I don't think you need both of these organizations that need it. You can share this solution across. I do think that it's a matter of now breaking down silos. And I think that these, especially procurement and supply chain, have evolved tremendously over the last several years because of how strategic their jobs have become, because of the level of risk, and because of the potential impact that disruption could have on the business. It has forced these organizations to kind of evolve and become a little more, I would say, collaborative or open to collaboration. Daniel, what are you saying?
I agree completely. And I mean, I'm really passionate about third-party management. And what I mean by that is connecting the different aspects of the third-party life cycle together. These silos are really dangerous. So to your point, Bob, the whole concept of, having procurement, supply managers, etc., CFOs, it's incredibly difficult. You have to connect this stuff up, not just for the user, but in order to keep that data useful and avoid duplication. So you've got to link risk with mitigation, with contracting, with service management, with supplier management, with assurance, with exit. These all matter. And interestingly, to your question about can solutions like this solve for that? Well, when you've got your infrastructure in better shape, yes, it can, because you use that data at the right points in the process properly. You don't duplicate, and therefore on that basis you're getting insights around your third parties pre-contract. That's before you've made commitment, and then you can make decisions to do something about that post-contract. So actually these tools, they don't fix your organization for you, but if you get your head around your organization and use these types of tools, yes, you're in a much stronger place.
I think one thing to also add on that is just the visibility and transparency of these tools. I know a lot of organizations might be operating in different areas. We've even had customers working off spreadsheets, and the answer is the data doesn't do the work for you because it's all siloed in whatever other system you have. If there are cross-functional teams operating in the same tool, they have the opportunity to share the work they already did. So some regulation or infraction happened. Instead of just handling it offline, you have a system that can show an entire audit trail. That's super helpful for kicking off the next action, the next time you deal with the supplier.
Yeah, it's funny because all our talk about the importance of third-party risk management, the first party's got to get his act together too before it can even start to work with third parties. Anyway, listen, guys, that's all some really great stuff. But I think it would be really helpful at this point is for us to get a little more information about Craft itself. So why don't we take a moment here for a quick demo about Craft and learn a little bit more about how it applies to this whole topic we're talking about today.
Imagine you are someone who is responsible for managing and mitigating risk, or at least responsible for finding out about these events and explaining to leadership what's going to happen, and also maybe yourself taking care of it. So this end user is someone who works with Craft, has been working with Craft, and all of their data, their first party data, their suppliers, all key systems have been already loaded into the systems. This is not Craft Day 1 or onboarding. This is Craft in action. So you as a user receive an email and it has your alerts for the day, and it's about 8 a.m. You can see that it started. And as you can see, is the first action in your Germany report that an explosion happened at the Port of Hamburg. So if you are in this day to day, you know that the Port of Hamburg does something like 70% of shipments through that port. So an explosion like that really would cause any manufacturers or distributors to come to a halt if they had to ship through it. So basically, this end user risk manager sees this alert and they want to go right into Craft Portal and find out what more information they have. So this alert ties them right into the alerts page in Craft directly, where they're seeing more information about the explosions. They can either read the news article, or if this sentence alone has their spidey senses up, they can click to see which companies are impacted. So because this person has already mapped and paired all of their suppliers against the locations in the news alerts, they're getting context of which potential companies are impacted. And if you look very closely, Motored in this scenario is a critical spend supplier and their single source. So in this demo, we had this be a electric mower company. So they're putting together their mowing system, and this Motored organization does electric mowers. Because this is critical spend and single source, the person getting this alert right away knows that their inventory is going to be impacted by this explosion. So they click out, they go into the Motored profile. They might want to investigate a little bit more. It's possible they could look into risks, but honestly, if they already know it's critical spend and they already know it's single source, this person's already going to start working the case. So when you log a case, you're immediately letting know every group that you found a problem. So this is tying the alert back to the case management, so you have inventory of it. And they're calling out that this is going to be something they're going to have to handle. So they make this a high priority case and they save it. When it's saved, you can also comment and start working with your team members right away. So if someone didn't read their email this morning, or they weren't aware that this was happening with this one client, you can note that you have a critical spend supplier that now probably is going to have delays with inventory. After that happens, that's not all that you can do in Craft. Huge thing is you can go right away and start alternate sourcing if you have pre-approved lists. So one thing that's really important to know is this client has already listed all of their pre-approved vendors, and they're going to go into portfolio check and they're going to say, okay, I can't have my motor organization. So again, pre-approved suppliers, they run the check, and I can't have my pre-approved organization be in Germany because of the port explosion. And I know that Motored is a company that does electric motors. So I also want to see if there's any alternate source that I can apply here. And this happened super quick. So wow factor, they were able to run through a massive list of organizations that they can work with. And they found Prey and this alternate supplier that could provide them electric motors. But if you look very closely, Prey has an A score and they're low credit risk. So if you were going to look to have a conversation with inventory, likely this end user would pick Prey. So they save and publish the check they've done so they can share it with the rest of their team. And now she's reaching out to Karen. And Karen is someone who's a category manager who can actually call this organization and talk and discuss if they have any extra inventory and if it can be bought. So it was 8 a.m. when you got the first email. This end user is able to alternate source and communicate to the rest of the organization and track this risk is actually happening. Once they add the note, they can go back and look into their end tier. So again, wow factor. Most organizations are still fighting a fire, and it's taking weeks for them to figure out these answers or to find a same-day solution. Because all this information is centered in Craft, they were able to do this right away. Now in the afternoon, this end user not only has a mitigation plan specifically for their single source supplier on their key product line, but they also can start investigating where else in their entire network are they potentially impacted by the fact that this issue happened in Germany. And lo and behold, this end user now has 3 companies that they can go investigate. So this is the blade part, the panel display, all these different engine parts. What the user can do with this type of information in their tiered sources is they can say, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to trace all of the category managers or the people that maintain relationships and make sure that our extended network isn't going to have a problem. Again, something like this could take upwards of weeks or even months to mitigate and investigate with single sources and people having to go into disparate systems. Because it's all in craft and because they can do it in one place and because this is shared across their teams, this type of action can be reduced from months and weeks down to days and hours. And that is the wow factor of the supply chain demo.
Cool.
Yeah, boy, that really helps
That's
clarify
awesome.
exactly what this tool consists of. Thank you so much for that. So here's something we talked a little bit earlier about just the price or the option of doing nothing, but I want to come back around to that because now that we've seen what the tool can do, I can still envision a company saying, yeah, okay, but I got other things on my mind right now. I don't want to do it this year. Let's put it off for a while. Ashley, why should I not do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of spoke to this already, but
Yeah.
not doing anything just means that you're not optimizing, being proactive as Mimi responded, answering signals. And one day that might be okay, but a week goes by, 2 weeks go by, these trends start happening and it builds up. There's so
Yeah.
many suppliers, and when you looked at the demo and the supply chain network as a whole, there's a lot underneath the first layer. It's like an iceberg, right? And you have to get to the right parts of the iceberg and mitigate fast if you're going to stay ahead.
Honestly, I think that the do nothing option really isn't that strong right now. I think it's a bit of a burning platform going on right now in terms of supplier management, the need for a tool like this because of the changes in supplier strategies, because of the higher risk, because of the increase in disruption. So thank you, all of you, for for those great insights, helping us understand what a truly effective modern day SRM solution looks like. At this point, I want to bring in our audience, though, because we do have some questions out there. And even as we are answering the questions that were already posed, audience members are encouraged to continue to pose your questions by clicking on that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we will get to as many of your questions as we can in the time allotted. So here's the thing. I'm going to ask this question to kind of throw it out to whoever wants to take it. Let me start with this. This questioner says, my business has a good start in building out our SRM strategy. Good for you. But we run into issues when we have to monitor N-tier suppliers. Of course, just every supply chain is multi-tier. Pardon me. What is the best way to get more granular visibility of my supplier network, that is my suppliers, outside of consolidating information from a bunch of third-party data providers? Mimi, you want to go with that? Oh, go ahead.
I have a
Dan.
view on this one for sure. I talk about this one a
Okay.
lot, both when I was in as a practitioner on this, but also with clients. Interestingly enough, we need to think carefully as the client organization on what's our role in the monitoring of our suppliers. There is only so much we can do. So what's really important is that we do a lot of this activity pre-contract. So when we're selecting suppliers, when we're understanding the risk of a transaction, it's then that we also identify which of your supply chain are material in providing this service to us. We understand that well. We then contract to ensure that our suppliers have appropriate controls and assurance around their own supply chain. And then crucially, you get them to monitor this. You then assure your tier one, not trying to assure 4, 5, and 6. It'll never work if you try and do it that way. Now, that sounds ideal. If you're in a situation where you've already got a mature supply base, as you would, then it is a little bit of a remediation exercise to go back, ask your suppliers, work with your supply managers, anyone who's close to that third party, and ask them about who are the third party, the critical nth parties as such. And work it backwards. But the easiest way to do this is do it up front, for sure.
I'll just add, although, yeah, I was going to say Ashley's going to have a way better and comprehensive answer than I will, but I'll say one thing to kick you off, and that is focus on your most strategic suppliers. You don't need to know N-tier for everyone. You need to know N-tier for the ones that are going to have the most impact to your business if they are disrupted. So Ashley, you want to add on to that, because I know you have lots of opinions, which is good.
When we've worked with teams and N-tier data is massive. You send in a list of 10, 100, and you're getting hundreds of thousands of connections. It's just so much data, it can paralyze you. And I know Mimi said focus on your most strategic, but just even that data set alone needs to be clean enough and tied to your business operations enough for you to really understand, like Daniel said, what is the impact to my product line for this particular supply chain? Doing it all at once just literally brings you to a halt. So being very, very intentional, and also weed out, right? A lot of end-tier providers are going to give you the thing that they sell is, I can light up this entire network and it's hundreds of thousands. You didn't even know the impact was this big. And the real answer is it's probably not as big as the first output of the data set. You probably need some time, and it takes time. It's not like a very small amount to really understand your operations and your chain and get rid of all the mess that, is introduced by someone opening up a can of every potential relationship that exists. Bob, you're on mute.
Sorry about that, folks. I don't know how that happened. Anyway, okay, this questioner says, where is the approved alternate supplier list stored? Is it pulled from existing product data or created as part of the Craft platform?
So
Maybe Ashley can address this.
Yeah, you can create it as part of the Craft platform. So one of the things that the platform has is very flexible grouping of suppliers. So if you have certain suppliers that are pre-approved, or you have suppliers that you choose to work with more often than none, or you have an innovative line that you want to investigate and you kind of want to do a different type of diligence, you have the flexibility to group them any way you want and change those groups as your organization matures or changes along the way.
Thank you. This questioner says, my team experiences a lot of unnecessary lag time adjusting to new regulations once they're announced. And of course, there are more and more of those every day, wasting valuable time and money. How do we prepare our supply chain for future regulations without going into this constant adjustment mode? Who wants to take the stab at that?
Definitely
Daniel?
got a lot of experience on this one over 20 years in financial services regulation. So, I mean, the harsh lesson I think we all learn on this is we get a lot of notice on regulation. And what I have noticed is we often, for very good reasons, don't get round to it until it's getting quite close and coming to fruition as such and going live. I think the big lesson learned for all of us when we've done that is don't leave it that long. When you know there's new regulation coming, start to prep for it, get messaging up to senior management, get budget and support for it, talk about impacts if it's not addressed, get practical with how to do it, because going last minute for some support on something is not going to go down very well with anybody. So to be proactive. I think the other thing is, if you've invested over time, and this comes back to why avoid doing nothing. If you've invested in making this work over a number of years, it's much easier for you to integrate new regulation and change into your entire process. It's just simpler because you can design it that way. And certainly if you get some help, you can definitely design it that way, because people like us make sure that we put every lesson learned we've ever put into your design. So that's the benefit of getting some help with these things. But yeah, there's definitely things you can do to mitigate the shock, if you like.
Yeah, one thing I was going to just add is, if you choose the right technology, the technology also should be set up in a way that it's very easy to add another compliance area. And if you already have, as Daniel mentioned, the steps in place to take care of compliance, and the ability to then having the right tool that has the ability to collaborate and the ability to kind of just set it up really quickly, which is kind of what we do with Craft. So you have a workflow that's kind of customized for that particular compliance or regulation. That's going to be really important as well. And when you're making those choices, make sure you choose a solution that isn't just set for a certain set of compliance. There's a lot of very point solutions for ESG or point solutions for cyber, but making sure you have a solution that really can work for across everything, I think is going to be the best approach in the future.
Great. Timely question too, considering all the regulations that are coming down the pike these days. So thank you for that. This questioner says, although we shouldn't, our business still operates mainly through spreadsheets. I'm sorry, I thought this was a PG-13 presentation. Since that is what works. how do I achieve buy-in from the rest of the organization, particularly executive, to migrate to a tool like Craft?
I think I can take the first crack at this one because I mentioned it a little bit earlier. But when you're doing work in spreadsheets and you're doing a ton of things offline, it's very hard to kind of create that trail and aggregate up, especially to executives who have questions. And so a lot of times when we talk to end users, they say like, a lot of my day is managing up, like figuring out how to describe the impact to someone. And if you have tools like Craft or a platform that has that for you, it's very easy to kind of pull up a dashboard and say, hey, this is what's going on, or here's how many risks we've averted this month, and here's the mitigations that we've gone after. If you don't do this inside a technology, then someone at your organization is probably managing that entire line of communication, and it just causes greater delays to people who want the visibility and the answers, but they don't want to bother the team to do it. So you're actually saving hours of handoffs going back and forth from data that was stale at one point to a live system that can both track it and update at a more frequent cadence.
Someday those spreadsheets are going to go away, right?
We all started on them. That's the thing.
Yeah, and I think they stick around, but it's still important to have a tool like this that takes precedence over the old way of doing things for sure. Too much data out there, too many things to think about that can be confined to a classic spreadsheet. Okay, this question is a very practical one. And it says, how long does it take to implement something like this? Questioner says, my team doesn't have many extra resources. Who does? To dedicate toward integrating a complex tool. And then also, does Craft offer any integrations with legacy tech? So 2 parts there. Maybe we start with just the idea, how long does it take? How do you deal with the extra resources they require?
I feel like we should take this one with Daniel because it really, again, starts with where your organization is and how much you're willing to sort of dip your toe in a new technology versus dedicate resources and process. So I don't know, Daniel, if you want to talk about the maturity, and then we can kind of talk a little bit. Cool.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully folk would have heard what we're talking about an awful lot in this is knowing what you need, being really clear on what you want, what your requirements are, risk appetite is, vision is, what you're trying to get from this. And I remember at the start, I talked about the need for explaining that to senior folk, getting it into policy and risk appetite and things like that. These are organizational complexities that don't happen overnight. So unless you have an incident and an immediate need, it becomes a top priority for the organization overnight. Typically, you've got to invest in this and work on this and sell to people internally. And I think that's another reason for not leaving this too late. Start with something now if you haven't started already. For the resilience of your organization and your own reputation, I would certainly recommend starting something now. I think then once you're clear on that, though, the selection of tools becomes simpler. It's much clearer that you know what you want. You can look at a specification, understand your requirements, how it meets them, etc. And I'll hand over to you guys because actually, I obviously know Craft fairly well from use of it myself. It's pretty quick to actually set up once you've actually got all that infrastructural stuff done in your own organization.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I would add is once you have the answer of what your risk definition is and who's actually going to work these risks, it's a matter of getting your suppliers turned on in the system at the right level of data you want, because that's also part of your risk definition. Do I want to track everything or not? And then it's very flexible to configure. So we have a lot of knobs you can turn to throttle things up and down, but we also have defaults, right? So you can have the standard practice in cyber definitions or the standard practice in ESG if you want to get started right away and start consuming the data. So really, again, once you have your fixed definitions, it's weeks to set up, and you even have the option of working with people who've done it before. So there's no kind of fear of not setting it up correctly the first time. There's a lot of support.
What does it actually require in terms of resources within the organization to implement this particular tool? Is it a responsibility of procurement? Is it IT? Is it finance? Is it COO? I mean, is it a team consisting of everybody kind of together working on implementation?
I think Daniel could probably answer more to this, but you have to ask yourself, who are the consumers and who are the actors? So you named a lot of parts of the organization that might need to be informed versus acting and mitigating. And so really part of defining risk maturity programs is who do you want dedicated to being the first ones that run ahead and know what's coming? And who do you need to bring along with you? And how do you share that level of information with them? Because it could be collaboration that you have very privately until you realize something truly is a risk that you then want to kick off to a bunch of other team members across the board. So having a tool that's flexible enough to do that is also super important because you don't want to be inundated with notifications or inundated with things when your role is just to be informed that something's happened.
Yeah, I think this is where the governance of your organization fits in with the tool in that regard. So, you know, you can set the triage, the tool can tell you lots of different interesting things that you want to know about your third parties, and you can understand and set your own, if you like, escalation criteria for what we do about those things, especially if you're screening and doing due diligence on third parties through something, you know, a tool like Craft, you need that governance to work alongside it.
Questioner says, what percentage of large organizations have, they say SCRM, I guess that means supply chain risk management, systems implemented? Mimi, do you have a sense of how popular this particular solution is right now?
Well, I will tell you that if anyone's, familiar with Gartner's hype cycle, this has SRM and SCRM, supplier risk management and supply chain risk management, which really all fall under the third party risk, umbrella, have become into the high adoption. So they've come out of the trough of disillusionment into mass adoption. And that means within the next 2 to 5 years, over 80% of enterprises will purchase SRM or SCRM. And my understanding is that many have purchased them in the past, and many have not been successful because they haven't taken the time to set up SRM programs first and really understand what Daniel said, the governance of what, would be the steps you take, what are the right processes, who are the right people, what is the governance, and then, apply the technology. So we are learning, we get a lot of inbound from failed tries of SCRM or SRM. And so we take you down kind of this initial path to start with in order to make sure that you're successful to begin with and get your needs met for what you need right now and then grow from there. But we are seeing a massive amount of focus and purchasing of SRM and SCRM today with enterprises. I don't know the exact amount of who've bought though.
Right.
You'll get different answers.
Thank you
from
for that.
different
And what you just said,
Yeah.
Mimi, that is a theme that we hear at every single type of technology implementation throughout the supply chain and elsewhere, is that technology alone is not the solution. You need business process change. You need humans in the loop. You need to set the stage for technology in order for it to have the, the desired effect. So thank you for bringing that up. It's a critical point to make. Unfortunately, I'm the one that has to tell you that we are just about out of time. I'm very sorry because this has been a great discussion. Thanks very much for a wonderful panel, and audience members. Anybody who didn't get their questions asked during this time, be happy. I'm sure our panelists would be happy to answer them offline. But that being the case, we do have time for just one final question. And I am going to direct it to Mimi. Mimi, if people were to leave this discussion with what you want them to take away, what would that be?
Thank you, Bob. Okay, so I think there's 3 things I would say. The first is understand where you are in your maturity of SRM. Really understand your program and kick off a program if you haven't done so already. So that's the first. Secondly, when you're shopping for a technology, 3 things to consider. One is the comprehensiveness of that data. Does it give you that foundation? 2, does it have that configurability that we talked about a lot today? And then 3, can you actually take action across your org and complete the SRM program and not just get data or information, but actually take action? So that's my number 2 of shopping for the technology. And then number 3 of my final takeaways is don't do nothing. I think it's important to do something and, do a risk assessment, do a maturity assessment to really understand where you are, but don't do nothing. So hopefully that helps.
Let's hammer that message home as we have throughout this hour. Thank you so much. Well, it's been a great discussion, Mimi Spear, Daniel Crease, and Ashley Arufo. Thank you so much for your insights. Thank you also, audience, for your great questions and your participation on this just super critical subject. We do have a couple of assets for you attendees. One is a solution brief on supplier risk management from Kraft. There is a QR code and a URL, which can be which will be sent to you after this webinar, so you don't have to scramble to take a picture of it or copy it down. But that looks like a very important asset. And if indeed, as Mimi says, if you're ready to get going, and you should be, you can schedule an SRM assessment session with Kraft's team. There again is a URL that you can access that, and that also will be provided to all attendees at the conclusion of this webinar. Once again, I want to thank our great panel and our audience. Wonderful discussion. Thanks everybody. And for our audience and our speakers, everybody, have a great day.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks, everybody.